All right. Now, yeah, a lot is said about the church and the state, even to our current time. So, it's the church did at that time have their own sailboats, their own, you call it, their own fleet, their armada. So they were partakers of war. Well, I believe it was Pope Gregory with his 200 sailboats or whatever, or sailing ships, going to defeat. So, but I don't believe they really wanted to be the the big military. It just went against all that they're really trying to gather in. Remember, they're collecting money out of people. So if they go around and they're big military, it makes it a little difficult. Well, we're collecting money out of you. You got to be good to God, and you can't kill anybody, but we can. So it just goes against their particular, set of morals. So, yeah, I believe that's what's going on. And in some respects, they like that time. I mean, of course, it's a great time because it's almost a peaceful time. And but yet, there is a split here. We are having a split of France, of all of the different lands, and these lands, I don't know. It looks like it was a split between the three. There were three sons, I believe. I'll try and find the map of it. I had it here somewhere. Here. Yeah, here's the map of it. We have one, I believe this was the Bold. Charles the Bold got this side. Oh, here it is, it's written. We have the church over here, getting this. But remember, they have all their ships as well. But yeah, the comfort of, the king being the murderer, essentially, his armies. Who do we have here? Louis the German. We have Louis the German here. And we have Lothair in the Central Kingdom. So it really started to forge this relationship that is almost inseparable for practically, till today even. It's an inseparable, the church and the state. The church, is there, and, well, I still think it's quite together, even to today. All right, so we're going to continue. I have a little bit more of Louis the First. This is 838. Louis, in the meantime, assembled his troops. Yay, that's what we all wanted, and marched to meet his sons, in the hope either of reducing them to submission or of bringing them to an engagement. You know what? Did I already read this? Oh, I hope not. Anyway, the two armies were in sight of each other when the three brothers, by a stroke of policy consistent with their perfidious projects, engaged the sovereign pontiff to negotiate an accommodation with their father. The Pope accordingly repaired to the Emperor's camp, where no honours of any kind were paid him, but where Louis reproached him with the irregularity of his conduct, and particularly with his presumption in daring to enter the French dominions without his permission. He kept him, however, some days in his camp, which were employed by the insidious pontiff in debauching his troops. The whole army went over to the rebels, and the unhappy monarch was hastily deposed by an obsequious assembly of the dependents of the Confederates. And Lothair, by the same authority, was raised to the vacant throne. So now Lothair's coming into power. The Empress was dismissed to a nunnery at Tortona. Charles was strictly guarded in the monastery of Saint Médard at Soissons, and his son Charles in the abbey of Prüm, in the forest of Ardennes. The victorious princes, after solemn professions of mutual attachment, separated, and each retired to his respective dominions. The Pope to Rome, and Pepin and Louis to Aquitaine and Bavaria. It had been formally settled by Pope Leo and confirmed by a solemn decree of the 12th Council of Toledo that no man who wore the habit of a penitent could discharge any civil or military functions. For this reason, Eybon, Archbishop of Rheims, a prelate of the most profligate manners, profligate, it could be profligated, the most profligate manners, condemned his sovereign to submit to the degradation of a public penance in the church of Saint Médard. After which ceremony they stripped him of his imperial vestments and clothed him in a dress stigmatized by the church, and incapacitating him from exercising the duties and prerogatives of royalty. But his submissive resignation to the insults of an unnatural son obliterated all his past errors and imprudence. The misfortunes of their lawful sovereign excited the pity of the multitude, ever discontented with the ruling powers, and the active diligence of his adherents soon opened the road for his restoration. Drogon, armed in the cause of his sovereign and a parent, and the nobility of France followed his example. The king of Aquitaine, through the persuasions of the abbot Hugh, joined him with his forces. The Saxons espoused their cause. The aged emperor was at length restored at Saint-Denis. His son Charles was released from confinement, and Lothair, after a fruitless resistance, was compelled to acknowledge his crime and throw himself on the mercy of his father. Louis was now advanced in years, and the natural infirmities of age were greatly increased by the calamities he had experienced. The Empress, aware that his death at this period would leave her son unprovided for, offered to cede to the King of Italy 1/2 of the empire, on condition that he should secure the other half to Prince Charles. To this Lothair consented, but he was on his road to the French court. While he was on the road to it, here it comes. He was attacked by an infectious disorder, the order that proved fatal to his principal councillors, and being deprived of their support, Judith conceived him to be an object of insignificance, no longer to be dreaded, and consequently no longer to be courted. She therefore cast her eyes upon the king of Aquitaine. Apparently something awful happened to him along the way, and he was no longer good looking. For sure. Okay, off to Aquitaine, and by promising to render the crown hereditary in his family, induced him to espouse the interests of her son. An assembly was accordingly convoked at Chercy upon Oise, in which the emperor declared Charles king of that part of Germany, which is bounded by Saxony and Switzerland, and all of Neustria, that is, of the whole country between the Seine, the Loire, and the sea, together with the territories of Toul, Bar, Auxerre, and Sens. This particular partition met with the approbation of the nobles, and was highly acceptable to Pepin. But the death of that monarch, soon after his return to Bordeaux, rendered it necessary to adopt some new arrangements. The emperor, when he assigned different kingdoms to his sons, reserved himself the right, in case they should die before him, of disposing of them at his pleasure. At the solicitation of the empress, he now consented to despoil the two sons of Pepin of their inheritance, in order to augment the appanage of Charles. Louis of Bavaria, displeased with the late decisions of the assembly at Chercy, had taken up arms, and though this revolt had been stifled in its birth, it nevertheless excited a degree of resentment in the emperor that induced him to curtail his dominions by confining him solely to the possession of Bavaria. Lothaire was now recalled from Italy, and a new division of the empire took place. All the southern and western provinces of France, which formed nearly the present kingdom, were assigned to the son of Judith, and the rest, with the exception of Bavaria, was secured to the king of Italy, who took an oath to become the guardian and protector of Charles. In 840, an insurrection in Aquitaine, for the purpose of placing the eldest son of Pepin on the throne of his father, induced the emperor to march thither with a numerous army. But he had no sooner reduced the insurgents to submission than he received information that Louis of Bavaria had embraced that opportunity to make an irruption into Germany. Thither he accordingly repaired, and by his presence dispelled the gathering clouds of rebellion. Having restored tranquillity to his dominions, he assembled a parliament at Worms, in the hope of establishing a perfect harmony between his children. But he did not live to accomplish this desirable object. Finding his strength fail him, he was conveyed to an island in the Rhine, near Mayence, where he languished for 6 weeks, and then expired, in the 72nd year of his age, and the 27th of his reign. A few days before his death, how he sent a crown, a sword, and a scepter of gold, enriched with precious stones, to Lothair, as a proof that he meant him to govern the empire. At the same time, he exhorted that prince to remember the solemn promise he had given to the empress for her son Charles. Being pressed by the Bishop of Metz to pardon Louis of Bavaria, he replied, "I pardon him with all my heart, but tell him from me that he ought to think seriously of obtaining pardon from God for bringing my grey hairs with furrow to the grave." All right, so it's a lot of trust going on. I'm seeing, even, surrounding the king here. He's dying. He did not bring Lothair in earlier, and now he's actually sending us his sword, a crown, the scepter of gold, and precious stones off to Lothair. At any time along the way, someone could have said, "Hey, I'm Lothair," but that didn't happen. Instead, we have a real trust going from place to place. The mind of Louis exhibited a strange mixture of virtue and weakness, intrepid in the field, but irresolute in the cabinet, humane from inclination, and from timidity cruel. So he apparently is classed as humane. He had sense enough to promulgate good and wholesome laws, but not sufficient spirit to enforce their observance. Injudicious in the choice of his ministers, he conferred favours on the unworthy, and was involved in calamities from vices not his own. Superstitiously devout, his very close attention to the minutiae of religion, in which substance is but too frequently sacrificed to form, led him to neglect the most effectual duties of government, and entrust to favourites what he should have executed himself. Hence, the factious and turbulent derived encouragement, and profiting by the meekness of the executive power, spread anarchy and desolation throughout the empire. In short, the virtues of Louis might have procured him distinction in a cloister, but were no means calculated to embellish a throne. They were by no means calculated to embellish a throne. Okay, so they're not really happy with him being king, as great king. This monarch was interred in the church of Saint Arnuil at Metz. By Ermengarde he had 3 sons, Lothair, Pepin, and Louis, and 4 daughters, Adelaide, married to Conrad, Count of Paris, Giselle, mother of Berenger, King of Italy, Alfred, wife to Count Begon, and Hildegard, who was married to Count Thierry by Judith of Bavaria. He had Charles, this is by Judith of Bavaria, he had Charles, surnamed the Bold. Now, it's odd too, because it's almost a time of peace, isn't it? And some would think that would be, wouldn't that make him a great king? But yeah. Some of the capitularies of this prince regulate the quantum of contribution to be paid by certain convents towards the support of the state. the monks had become so rich that the celebrated Alcuinus is said to have had upwards of 20,000 slaves. Yow! And so powerful that some of them had the audacity to stand forward as the leaders of a party, and in that capacity to assemble troops. The abbots, a title that was confined to the heads of monasteries, from that time assumed the pastoral staff, which was the symbol of pontifical dignity and with the ancient Romans. Okay, Charles II, surnamed the Bold. Now, did I have a picture of him here? We're really looking at him over here. He's getting this green zone. And it looks like the old King Louis is gone. He inherited this all from his father, Charlemagne. A little bit here going on, but really it wasn't a time of too much claim. It had been claimed. More now, he's dying, and so there's a split. So let's go and try and find this Bald fellow. Do I have him? You know, I did at one point. Now, oddly, I'm not seeing him listed as bald, are you? No, they're showing in others. Okay, so we'll just leave him here at that. It must mean something else also. Possibly forgetful. You don't have your hair, you're forgetting everything now. 840 AD. The ambition of Lothair, which had frequently silenced the dictates of nature, scorned to be confined by the feeble barrier of an oath. I said I was going to try stop. Okay. Of an oath. On the first news of the emperor's death, he resolved to effect the deposition of his two brothers, and with that view levied a powerful army, and directed his march towards the frontiers of Germany. He hoped to take Louis of Bavaria by surprise, but was greatly astonished to find him prepared with a formidable body of troops to dispute the passage into his dominions. A reception so unexpected disconcerted his plan, and not daring to advance, he proposed an interview, in which a suspension of arms till the following year was mutually agreed on. Each party had his views in consenting to a truce. Louis was anxious to secure the Saxons and the rest of his German subjects, while Lothair was intent upon an invasion of France. Whether he had been invited by some of the principal nobility, he accordingly passed the Meuse and laid waste the possessions of all who refused to espouse his cause. Marry his cause. Charles, having assembled a small army to oppose the progress of his perfidious brother, fixed his camp at Orleans, and the dispute was on the point of being decided by a battle, when Lothair, who had vainly endeavoured to seduce from their duty the troops of his opponent, suddenly proposed an accommodation. Though he insisted on the cession we're going to cease it here. The cession of a part of Neustria. Charles thought it might be prudent to purchase a peace, even on these hard terms, than to risk an action with an enemy whose forces were so greatly superior to his own. Lothair, however, promised to abide by the decision of a General Assembly, which was immediately summoned to meet at the palace of Attigny upon the Aisne in the month of May in the following year, till which time no hostilities were to be attempted against Charles. This revived the hopes of the young monarch, who placed a firm reliance on the affection of his subjects and the equity of the nation, which began to evince a strong attachment to his interests. No longer are the kings saying, I'm going to war. They are going to assembly first for decision of war. The Diet assembled at the appointed time, but Lothair neglected to attend it, though it was convened by his orders. This violation of his word, together with a second eruption into Germany and some new efforts to gain over the nobles of Neustria, at length convinced the two kings that it was necessary they should unite their utmost endeavours to refrain the ambition of their eldest brother. So now it looks like they're going behind the assembly. A junction of their forces was accordingly effected on the confines of Lorraine, where, though greatly superior in number to Lothair, they made the most equitable proposals of accommodation. To these the Italian monarch pretended to listen, but he only waited till the son, Pepin, had joined them with a strong reinforcement from Aquitaine, when he suddenly put a stop to the negotiation and advanced to the plains of Fontenay, a village in Auxerrois, where a most bloody and obstinate engagement took place. The cause of justice prevailed, and Louis and Charles were left matters of the field. It has been pretended by some modern writers that 100,000 men fell in the battle. But this must be a gross exaggeration, as Nithard, a contemporary author who was present at the action, takes no notice of a circumstance that, if true, could not have escaped his attention. Lothair, compelled to fly, took refuge at La Chapelle, where he exerted his utmost efforts to give new strength to his declining party. As the Saxons had been partly compelled to embrace Christianity, he fought to secure their assistance by permitting them to renew their ancient lands and customs. When by his intrigues he had collected a sufficient force, we made an unsuccessful attempt on the borders of Bavaria. Then, directing his march towards Paris, he laid the whole country waste, till, being stopped by an inundation of the Seine, he was compelled to return without accomplishing the object of his expedition. So he did cause some trouble along the way, though. In 843, Lothair's design was to effect a division between the two kings, but all his efforts for this purpose proved fruitless. Charles and Louis convinced that their common safety depended on their union, solemnly confirmed the league that subsisted between them, and renewed their alliance by an oath drawn up. It was an oath drawn up in their respective languages. Louis swore in the Roman language that he might be understood by the French to whom his oath was addressed, and Charles in tout fait sien, or as it was indiscriminately called, the Franc-Deutsch, Francodeutsch perhaps, Theotiste, Theotique, or Theosis, to render himself intelligible to his brother's subjects. The Roman language was spoken in Neustra and was a corrupt mixture of the Latin of the Celtics. The latter was a kind of German, nearly resembling the present dialect of the Frisians. I don't know how they spoke all those languages. I can barely speak English. The two princes, though of superior force, again fought to bring the emperor to accommodation. But he proudly refused to admit their ambassadors to an audience, and even dismissed them with ignominy. An insult so gross excited universal indignation. The troops of Louis and Charles loudly demanded to be led against the mass. Against the man. The man himself, the man whom they justly considered as the author of those troubles, to which the empire was exposed. Their leaders cheerfully complied with their requests. The army was put in motion, and on its approach the Bishop of Mayence, who had been appointed to guard the banks of the Moselle, deserted his post and fled with the utmost precipitation to Lothair. No, wait a minute. Utmost precipitation. He's gone. Lothair, unable to resist the torrent, left his palace at Sinsic and took refuge at Aix-la-Chapelle. But hearing that his brothers were advancing, he stripped his father's magnificent palace of all of its most valuable effects and retired towards the Rhone, with the intention it pursued to pass on to Italy. So then he took everything out of the palace, moved on to the Rhone. A doubt now arose in the minds of the conquerors from the uncertainty whether they ought to take possession of a country which there was nobody to dispute with them, or to restore it to a brother who had left it only from his inability to defend it. The knotty point was referred to the decision of the bishops. The episcopal character, according to the prevailing superstition of the times, being gifted with superior knowledge, as well on political and martial affairs as on ecclesiastical matters. From the absurd idea was derived that enormous extent of authority possessed by the prelates, who, being empowered to decide on all questions of whatever nature, found the means of turning everything to their own advantage. Princes themselves, increased. They increased by their conduct, the ambition of the hierarchy, by accepting crowns from the hands of the bishops, gave them the power to dispose of them. Such prelates as followed the court assembled at Aix-la-Chapelle in order to decide on the fate of Lothaire, and his subjects were consequently absolved from their oaths of allegiance. They asked Louis and Charles if they could promise to govern with greater justice than Lothaire. To this the monarchs, of course, replied in the affirmative, and the bishop who presided then said, "We permit you, by divine authority, to reign in the place of your brother, to govern his kingdom according to the will of God. We exhort you, we command you so to do." In virtue of this arbitrary decision, which established a most dangerous precedent, and showed in the monarchs who submitted to it an astonishing degree of imbecility, the provinces which Lothaire had abandoned were equally divided between the brothers. But this partition was speedily changed, for the emperor, conscious of his own inability to maintain a war against forces so superior to his own, made his pride subservient to his interest, and now humbly solicited that accommodation which he had so recently rejected with disdain. His brothers, sincerely wishing for the restoration of tranquillity, listened to his proposals with joy, and the three monarchs meeting at Verdun, a new division of the empire took place. Charles the Bald was secured in the possession of Neustria, Aquitaine, and Septimania. To Lothaire was confirmed with the title of Emperor, all Italy, Provence, Franche-Comté, and the Lyonnois, and all that country which lies within the Rhone, the Rhine and the Saône, the Meuse and the Schelde, and Bavaria, with the rest of Germany, was assigned to Louis. So Louis got Bavaria and the rest of Germany. And there we have the middle, heading off to Lothaire. To this territory were annexed the rest of Germany, whence he acquired the appellation of Louis the German, by which he will hereafter be distinguished. To this territory were annexed the city of Mayence, Worms, and Spires, with their dioceses, merely for the purpose of supplying him with wine, no vineyards having been yet planted in any other part of his German dominions. Adelard, a nobleman of Aquitaine, whose granddaughter Ermentrude Charles had recently married, acted as mediator between the contending parties, and promoted the conclusion of the present treaty, by which the flames of civil war were, for the present, extinguished. The attention of Charles and his brother was now directed to some commotions of inferior consequence, which prevailed in different parts of their dominions. A revolt of the Abodrites was speedily quelled by Louis the German, and Count Bernard, who maintained a correspondence with the enemies of Charles, paid for his disloyalty with his life. But William, the Count's son, seized the city of Thoulouse and raised up the whole country that borders on the Pyrenees in favour of young Pepin. In vain did the king lay siege to his new conquest. A considerable detachment of his troops were attacked by the rebels and totally defeated. In this action fell the abbots Hugh and Ricbolet, two noblemen equally distinguished for the dignity of their birth and the excellence of their character. They were both descended from the blood royal, the first being uncle and the second cousin german to the king. From this circumstance it appears that the prohibition to bear arms was not much attended by the dignified clergy. Charles was now compelled to leave William in possession of Thoulouse in order to quell an insurrection in Brittany, of which Count Lambert was the principal instigator and conductor. That nobleman, having been expelled from Nantes by Duke Nomenau, had called in the Normans to his assistance, who diffused terror. They diffused terror and dismay through the whole country. So now they're waking up the Normans in this 854 time. 842. These savage hordes had made their first incursions on the French territories about the commencement of the 9th century, when all the power of Charlemagne had proved inadequate to prevent them from ravaging the countries of Friesland and Saxony. During the reign of his successor, Louis the Gentle, they returned and, landing at Antwerp, reduced that city to ashes. The troubles which prevailed in the empire after the death of Louis revived their avidity and induced them to renew their depredations. They entered France by the Seine in 842 and sacked the city of Rouen, which they had taken by surprise. Another fleet of the barbarians, under the conduct of Lambert, sailed up the Loire as far as Nantes, which experienced a similar fate. From hence they made irruptions into Anjou and Touraine, and laid waste the whole province of Guyenne. The monasteries and churches were all plundered, and such as refused to pay an exorbitant ransom were burnt. If you didn't pay up, you were burned. All the nuns were first, I've got to get this one right. What happened to the nuns? All the nuns were first, revisited, ravished. Ravished. Oh no, ravished nuns. Oh, darn that. Okay, they were first ravished and then divided among the savage plunderers. The priests, the monks, and all such as were enfeebled by age were massacred. But the young men and children were either condemned to perpetual slavery or destined to become the companions and accomplices of these lawless barbarians. When they had collected as much booty as they could carry off, they either returned to their own country or else repaired to some other coast, where they converted it into money. Encouraged by the success of their first incursions, they were speedily induced to renew them. In 844, the ocean was covered with their ships. It was no longer a band of thieves sailing without order or regularity in pursuit of plunder, but a formidable fleet of 600 vessels, commanded by a king and containing a numerous army. This prince, whose name was Eric, took Hamburg by surprise, then advanced into the interior parts of Germany, committed the most horrid devastations, defeated the natives in 2 pitched battles, and returning to his dominions laden with plunder, dispatched Regnier, one of his captains, into France. Entering the Seine with 120 vessels, he attacked Rouen, which was again which was again taken and pillaged. He then continued his course up the river till he came to Paris, which, being unprovided with the means of defence, became a prey to the barbarians. Charles the Bald had retired to Saint-Denis, where he had thrown up entrenchments for the purpose of defending the sacred relics that were there deposited. Not daring to risk a battle, he was compelled to listen to the degrading proposals of the Norman, who exacted, as the price of his absence, 7,000 pounds weight of silver. So he didn't really want to meet with him, but he said, okay, will you pay me 7,000 pounds? So they were really kind of pirates, the Normans, in the beginning. That's what they're leading on to. They had they had lots of ships, apparently. Prince Eric. This contemptible policy defeated the end it was meant to answer, since the money thus given to purchase a peace supplied the invaders with the means of renewing the war. Nor did they fail to profit by the advantage they had acquired. Every year of Charles' reign was signalized by some new eruption. Bordeaux, Ghent, Rouen, Nantes, Touraine, Angers, Blois, Sainte-Valery, Amiens, Noyon, and Beauvais were successively and repeatedly attacked, reduced, and plundered. To see a descendant of Charlemagne in league of these lawless depredators was the only occurrence that could increase the horror of the scene. Young Pepin, abandoned by the people of Aquitaine in 857, did not blush to solicit their friendship and to forward their schemes. Encouraged by his accession of force, they speedily overran the whole kingdom of France. Though attracted at first by the mere prospect of plunder, they now began to conceive more important designs, and to seek for a place of settlement. They seized the island of Ozel upon the Seine, and making that their headquarters, sent out detachments to ravage the surrounding country. nor could the king dislodge them from their important post. In 861, which opened them a passage into the very heart of Neustria, till he had procured the assistance of their own countrymen. Though sometimes conquered, they speedily returned with fresh forces. It was not long before they reappeared on the beautiful banks of the Loire, where they committed the most horrid excesses. In 864, Orléans and Poitiers, being taken by Esquilade, were pillaged and burnt. Another band of adventurers forced the passages of the Piste on the Seine, and defeated a body of French that was sent to defend them. Charles, apprehensive that they meant again to establish themselves on that river, made proposals for an accommodation, and that was mean enough to submit to terms still more hard and degrading than those which were imposed on him by the Treaty of Saint-Denis. He gave them 4,000 weight of silver, engaged to pay a stipulated sum for every Norman that had been killed by the peasants in their own defence, and consented to ransom even such of the French prisoners as he had effected their escape. On these conditions the barbarians retired to Jumieges, where they remained. Oh my gosh, the Normans are really causing problems here. Where they remained till the year 865. That is, till every article of the treaty was literally fulfilled. Some time after, another detachment, in conjunction with the Bretons, surprised and sacked the town of Man. These were pursued by Robert the Strong, who was unfortunately killed by an arrow when on the point of forcing their entrenchments. This nobleman, with regard to whose origin so many different opinions have prevailed, had been honoured with the government and ducal title of what was called then the Duchy of Paris. He was the great-grandfather of Hugh Capet, from whom all the monarchs who have reigned over France for these last 800 years were descended. His loss was universally lamented, and he received the appellation of the Maccabeus of the age. A new incursion of the Normans into Anjou at length awakened the king from his lethargy, and determined him to exert every effort to expel the formidable ravagers from his dominions. Solomon, Duke of Brittany, was persuaded to join his forces to those of Charles. The principal leaders of these daring adventurers were besieged in Angers in 873, and after being reduced to the last extremity, submitted to purchase their retreat and ransom their ships by surrendering the spoil they had acquired. They were permitted to retire to an island on the Loire, on condition that they would leave it in the month of February in the following year. But when the time came for their departure, they refused to comply with the terms of capitulation, And as Charles had not ships sufficient for the purpose of dislodging them, they remained there for some time longer, during which they continued their usual depredations. Such were the calamities to which the kingdom was exposed under the reign of Charles by the dreadful incursions of the Normans. We judged it expedient to relate them together, that the attention of the reader might not be divided, and that by bringing them, as it were, to a point, he might be better enabled to appreciate the weakness of the government, which was incapable of adopting the necessary means of defence, and the ignorance of the age, which neither possessed the art of fortifying towns nor the precaution of providing resources against the time of misfortune. I'm going to take a break there. Yeah, I think that's it for me today. So I'm on page 210, and I'm definitely a third way through the book. Possibly a little bit more. But yes, the Normans are there and they're holding out ransoms. They have ships. It's almost as if it's a dual kingdom between the Normans and Charles the Bald. Right, and off we go.